Hello, welcome everybody to this video. I'm excited because I got a guest here with me, friend of mine from I don't know how long ago back or how many years it's been, but Liana Lowenstein, welcome. So glad to have you here. And we're going to talk about a few different things, but things that you're very well expertised in. In terms of really focusing on directive, creative play interventions and activities, which you've written about extensively and trained about extensively. But we're going to now have a little conversation about some things we want to highlight about this type of work. I know you have a healthy collection of books and resources, which we'll get to, many of which I own and get used regularly. I'm in my home office, by the way, and all your books are in my clinic office because I use them and the interns use them and they get utilized a lot.
That's nice. Thank you.
And of course, you do a lot of other things too, but there's a focus here that you have in some of your writings, quite a bit of them on these creative play interventions, therapy interventions, activities that you can use as mental health professionals. So I just want to start by asking you the benefits of this type of work. What are some of the benefits you found of using directive interventions in our work? And welcome, by the way. I just jumped right in because I'm so excited, but just welcome.
Well, thank you. And let me just jump in and before
Yeah,
I kind of go on and just say how thrilled I am to be here. And Robert, you are one of my favorite peeps in our flavor. I adore you and your work. You are so creative and you're such a wonderful person. So I'm just really thrilled to be part of your online presence. So thank you for inviting me here today.
awesome.
And before I answer that question, I want to also say that I think a lot of people make an assumption that I'm only
Hmm.
directive structured activities in my work because all my books contain structured directive
Right.
interventions. But I'm a prescriptive play therapist. I'm very integrative. I'm trained in many different approaches, and I very much blend child-led and therapist-led interventions or approaches, and very much am use and a huge fan of child-centered play therapy. So I
Yeah.
want to just kind of say that I love the marriage of directive and non-directive. But for the purposes of today, we're focusing on why use engaging
Right.
directive activities, and how to use them. So first of all, I think that there are many benefits of directive approaches. First of all, many kids are not going to bring up certain issues that are really hard to talk about. It's scary, it's difficult. And so when we can introduce to the child a directive activity that gently guides them to talk about their issues, and we do it in an engaging way through a therapeutic game, a story, an art activity, that helps them talk about really difficult things and it helps them work through their treatment goals.
Yeah.
Um, and in a world where there's pressure, I think for us to, move the child along and help them to work through stuff in shorter amounts of time, that's where I think directive activities can really be beneficial. I think also when we introduce something that's engaging and directive, it can increase the child's motivation to attend therapy because, hey, we're playing a game and it's kind of fun, it's
Yeah.
engaging, that motivates them. Of course, it increases self-disclosure of important things, and often things come out through a game or a story or an art activity that wouldn't necessarily come out in other ways. And then also when we can teach a skill to the
Mhm.
child using an engaging game, well, the child's going to be much more, first of all, will understand what we're trying to teach them if it's engaging, and will be much more motivated to actually practice it and use it when they need to if it's a
Yeah.
game or something engaging. So those
They,
are a
s-
few.
I love it. I mean, everything you were saying, yes, and I've actually experienced it with clients. Um, I was also thinking from my perspective, working with a lot of neurodivergent kids, there are oftentimes just some very distinct play preferences that
Yeah,
neurodivergent kids have. And sometimes that is, they want to play a game. That's where their play is oriented toward. They want you to come up with a structured activity or game to do.
right.
And that's just where their play preference lies. And that's
Yeah,
another great benefit.
definitely. And they may, kind of choose the same thing every
Hmm.
session, and
Yeah.
and things can get a little bit stagnant. So when you introduce them to another world of, hey, this is something else that's also really engaging,
Yeah,
uh, that it really enrich the therapeutic process.
absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
So guidelines, like obviously someone, I know there are lots of play therapists, child therapists, even other disciplines who use directive, structured, creative interventions. What would you say are some guidelines for doing this? Just choosing it, implementing it, etc.
Well, of course, it has to fit with the therapeutic needs of the client. And that comes from doing a really good assessment.
Hmm.
So within the assessment, you can introduce directive activities that assess, in a very comprehensive way, the needs of the child, the needs of the family.
Yeah.
And then you want to develop a treatment plan. So you want to select interventions that are appropriate to the treatment goals that fit the phase of the therapeutic intervention process. You want to start with activities that build rapport, of course, and then slowly get into activities, initially ones that don't require great emotional risk taking, because that's going
Hmm.
to be way too threatening and anxiety provoking for the
Right.
child. And then slowly, as the child is ready, introduce things that, that are a little bit more, challenging for the client. They need to be appropriate to the child's skill level, developmental capacity, and match the child's preferences. You mentioned this just a moment ago, that kids do have preferences. So if you're working with a child who loves games, well then, introduce a therapeutic game. If you are working with a child who loves the crafts, then you want to do something that's more art based. If you're working with a child who is not going to kind of sit still at a table, then you want to make it something really active.
Yeah.
Those are a couple of key guidelines.
Yeah, I love the way you describe that because, of course, I do some directive intervention work. I'm kind of like you, I'm prescriptive. And so sometimes it falls that way. Sometimes I'm more non-directive. I really base it on the child. But when I do directive work, and I think this is something that people misunderstand sometimes about directive structured interventions, is if you do know what you're doing and you're doing it correctly, it is a very thoughtful process. It's a thought out process. It's not random. It's
Yeah,
not
so
that
that's
you,
so important. It's so important that you
yeah,
really do want to plan that out, and not kind of just fly by the seat of their pants, and you don't want to
right.
select it haphazardly, because there is a risk, especially if you are a clinician who is super busy,
Hmm.
and haven't really kind of planned out the session. I think there's a risk of it being a little bit more haphazard in how you
Yeah.
select it. Oh, okay, I'm just gonna do this today, right?
Yes, right.
So it's got to be thought out.
Yeah, for sure. And I've got actually two favorite questions to ask you here. This is number one. Is the sort of balance or what kind of needs to happen in terms of, the task, there's the intervention, we're implementing it, we're doing it, and then the processing and the process and how those work together.
Yeah, it's a good, great question. Um, I think sometimes, again, there's a risk of people getting really excited about an activity, like, oh, I'm going to play this game with this child,
Hmm.
and really losing sight of the process. And both are important, right? I mean, you want to be enthusiastic, but you also, it's always really about the process. So, um, the process is more important than a product. I say this a lot in my training. So it's the technique is not the therapy.
Mhm.
It's the means to facilitate the therapeutic process. So what I mean by that is, you really want to give thought to the overall process. Things like, how am I going to introduce this activity? What open-ended exploratory questions are appropriate to ask given what the child just said? How can I use this activity to really normalize the child's feelings and reflect content and reflect feeling? And what about the child's nonverbal communication in this activity? I really want to be carefully attuned to the child, so I pick up on that.
Yeah.
The child's not going to say, I'm feeling really anxious right now while we play this game.
Hmm.
You're asking me questions about the sexual abuse, right? So you've got to be really attuned to what is going on with the child. And then match the process to what's going on with the child. And
Yeah.
then, of course, expressing empathy and support. So those are all really important processing components that make an activity therapeutic.
Yeah. So well said, right? And again, just back to what we just talked about, the thoughtfulness of doing this work. It's not just a random fun game, but there's so much you, the therapist, are thinking about and doing as this is unraveling and unfolding. And yeah, hopefully having fun, for the child, but also so many other layers here that are happening that you are holding as the therapist in this
Yeah.
process.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, second favorite question. Maybe this is number one. It's the second I'm asking you, but maybe it's my top favorite. I have several of your books, and I know there's a lot of interventions that you've produced through the years. So, do you have a favorite?
Okay. So I can't just like a parent can't pick a favorite child. I can't pick a favorite activity,
Mhm.
but let me throw out an activity that I think would be a good one for me to present briefly now,
Okay,
because it can be used with so many different client situations. So I want people who are watching this video to leave with something that they can kind of adapt and use with a broad range of clients.
sure.
So I call this the red and black card game. So you just need a deck of cards, and you, prior to the session, think about questions you want to ask the child. So you develop a little worksheet for the game. So let's say you're using it as an assessment activity. I would ask some assessment specific questions. Let's say you're assessing a child who's just experienced the death of a parent. So I'd want to throw in some questions that assess for that. So the child picks from the deck of cards, and if they get a red card, they answer one of the questions. And if they pick a black card, then they pick from what I call the get moving grab bag. So it's a little bag that has little fun short movements, like stomp your feet 10 times, then take 2 deep breaths. Do 3 big arm circles, then 2 deep breaths. Run in place for 10 seconds, 2 deep breaths. So you're interspersing the questions with the child getting up and moving, and both child and therapist together follow
Yeah,
whatever the child picks from the grab bag. So it makes it a little bit more engaging, fun, active. And so, let's say, bereaved child assessment questions, you always want to start with a fairly neutral question, like what's one of your favorite things to do?
hmm,
And what's something that makes you feel happy? Tell about a time you felt really sad, angry, or upset. 3 feelings you had when the person died. Something that's been really difficult for you since the person died. Something somebody did that helped you since the person died. And then end with something, again, kind of going back to neutral, you know, what's something you can do to help yourself when you're feeling upset, or, so you want to balance those kinds of
yeah,
questions. And then you can easily modify this. You could play this with a child who's coming to see you because they've been bullied. You
yeah,
can, with a child who's, experienced a separation or divorce. You can word the question so they're geared more to younger kids versus, teens. And maybe instead of a get moving grab bag, there are some coping, it's a coping
Right.
kit. So it's really a game that you can, use with many different clients. If you want to attach reinforcers, they can get a point for every question they answer. And then at the end, once they get 10 points, they can trade in the points for a prize from your prize box. But you certainly don't have to do that if that's not your
Yeah.
style. So
Yeah.
that's one little like
That's
is
a
easy.
good one. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I love the way that a lot of these, including the one you just shared, like you mentioned, you can adapt this.
yeah,
It's designed to be flexible. So you can change the topic,
yeah.
and you can change this way that you're doing it if that's a better fit for this client or this child. That's so
Mhm.
important to me because my neurodivergent kids who come in are also different.
Yeah,
So I have to be able to take things and be able to adapt them and shift them per child, per need. And I
yes,
love that.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I do have like maybe a favorite. Maybe
Oh,
because it was one of the first ones I learned and I started using it so much in AutPlay trainings. And it was from um, Creative Interventions for Children and Youth, either one or two, volume one or two. I can't remember which book. I think it's actually two, the more
our
creative
creative.
interventions, but it's called Letting the Cat Out of the Bag.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this before, I think. Yes. I just, I love it for so many reasons. It's simple, but it can apply to so many different therapy goals. The basic idea I'll share here with people since I brought it up is some kind of bag. And in the instructions, it's sort of like a plush cat that you can get, but it could be any animal. You could get any kind of plush and put in the bag. And you take turns with the child. Maybe you would go first just so the child can understand what this activity is about. Then you reach in the bag, you pull out the cat and you give a reaction, right? This can be a feeling, this can be some kind of state of being. And the child tries to guess, how are you thinking, feeling right now, pulling that cat out of the bag?
Mm.
And then, of course, the child can get the bag, pull it out, give a reaction, and you try to guess. You could work on feelings. You could work on just kind of trying to better understand what's going on with somebody else, maybe perspective taking.
Mm.
It also is a nice connection and engagement game. I've
Yes.
played it a lot of times just for building relationship with the child and even between a child and a parent.
Yeah.
So simple, fun, super
Yes.
playful. Kids love
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but also a lot of different pieces that can be part of therapy goals that you're working on. Emotion
Mhm.
identification, engagement. There's even some social navigation in here. There's a
Very
lot of different components. Yeah.
yeah. Yes.
So letting the cat out of the bag, one of my all-time favorites.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that you like that one, and I like it too.
Yeah,
So
it's a good one. Well, we talked about your resources, but let's really talk about them. You've got a lot of books. I don't know if you can list them all off the top of your head, can you?
well, there's 15 now. I just launched my 15th.
15.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. What's
And
the most recent one?
not all are books that I wrote. So many of them are books that I wrote.
Yeah,
Um, but a bunch of them are compilations where I invited others to contribute.
right.
So, many of my books are compilations of just really brilliant creative activities from child and family therapists from all over
Yes.
the world. And of course, you have contributed to some of those books,
Yeah.
which is really cool to be able to edit those books and put them out there and really share the wonderful creativity that's out there.
Yeah. And some of them are books like the two I mentioned, which have sort of categories inside the book, like emotion regulation or grief or, anxiety reduction or something, and then
Yeah.
different interventions underneath that topic. And some of your books are topic specific, like one of the most recent ones, or the most recent one, which focuses on grief and bereavement.
Yeah, yeah, so there's two. So Corey helps kids cope with grief, which is geared to younger kids, like 4 to 7. And then I just launched the second edition of Creative Interventions for Bereaved Children, which is more geared
Okay.
to 7 to 12.
Right.
So yeah, I do have ones that are more general, and then ones are more specific to certain treatment populations.
So if somebody wanted to check out your resources, what's the best way to do this?
Well, so my books are available on Amazon and other, online booksellers, but they can also get them on my website,
Hmm.
and then they could also read excerpts, and see the table of contents. And I'll give a discount code as well, so
Yay.
they can get 20% off with code PC14. That's P as in Peter, C as in cat. So code PC14 will give you 20%. And then if you buy any 4 books, you get an extra 10% off. So that's
Oh
30%
wow.
off.
Nice.
And then if I've tried to make my website a hub of lots of free stuff. So on my website, actually, there's a free ebook
Mhm.
with activities. For some are mine and some are other people's activities. So they can get a free ebook on my website. And they can sign up for my newsletter, which goes out maybe 4 times a year. And anyone who signs up for my newsletter automatically gets entered into a draw to win one of my books. And they get to select any book, any of my books.
Nice.
Um, so, and I also have articles on all kinds
Mhm.
of different topics on my website, an article library for parents and one for mental health professionals. So lots of really helpful resources that people can access. And of course, my website is lianalowenstein.com.
We need to say that, right? What is the website? So that's easy. LianaLowenstein.com. We'll have that up here, of course. People can see the link. And thanks for sharing that. There are a lot of resources on your website, including that free book, which is really cool. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Because if you weren't going to mention it, I was going to mention it. Well, thank you for hanging out and talking with me and doing this video. It was just fun to talk about this. I think it's a good topic to talk about, and I love the points that were made. I think those are important things for people to understand about directive intervention and activities in our field. So thank you for coming on and sharing with us.
Well, thank you, Robert, for everything that you do for our field. You're amazing.
Awesome. And thank you all for watching. Obviously, like, subscribe, and come back and watch more videos. And don't forget to go check out Liana's website, because I think you'll find some stuff there that you will like and will be helpful to you. All right. Take care. Bye.